The Iron Furnace. Boker Tov, good morning. Welcome to our Aliyah, this brand new um, book of Torah that we get to begin with today, the book of Shemot. This is the dawn of redemption, and we get to enter into this book and get to explore just all the beautiful things about Shemot. And of course, as I've said for years, uh, all five books of Moses, which remember that Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, all five books of those, all five of those books, not part of them, but all of them are in fact the literal law of Moses. So we talk about the law of God, the law of Moses, which is the same thing. It's called the law of Moses in honor of Moses, but in actual fact, it's the law of God. Okay. You have to understand that the law of God, i.e., the law of Moses, again, just want to make that point because I want you to connect the dots there, is the entirety of the first five books of the Bible, which means that if somebody says, well, through JC, the law of Moses has been done away with, what they are in effect saying, and 9 times out of 10, they haven't the foggiest idea what they're saying. They're just parroting some type of, rubbish babble that they've heard their whole life. But what they are in fact saying is that, which of course is utterly absurd, and that is that JC came and through his death, burial, and resurrection, he tore to shreds, eliminated, otherwise made ineffectual, irrelevant, the first five books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. All of it, every single bit of it, which of course doesn't make any sense at all. But I want you to understand that, okay? So we are now in the book of Shemot. And so all of that together really makes up the gospel message. So where do we find the gospel? Oh, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? No, we don't. Where do we find the gospel? In the place that the Messiah found it. He found it in the law of Moses and the prophets. So that's where the gospel is. Now, naturally, the law of, the gospel is I was going to use the word encoded, but that's not really quite accurate. It's in the insights, if you will, to those passages of scripture, the law of Moses and the prophets. In other words, you have to have the oral Torah in order to fully understand it. You have to. It's a requirement. We talked about the fact, by the way, last week, that if you are somebody who is against the oral Torah, you've been taught by Gentiles that it is just the teachings of men and it has no relevancy whatsoever. In fact, it's evil, needs to be avoided. You think erroneously that Yeshua came to war against it or fight against it. That's not true. And if you feel that way, after we talked about last week, that you have a big issue. And the big issue is that if that's the case, King David can't be king and Messiah Yeshua can't certainly be the Messiah. Because without the oral Torah, you have no way to overcome the fact that Ruth joined Israel and became the wife of Boaz. If you don't believe in the oral Torah, there is literally zero way to overcome that. Okay, so you just need to believe that, understand that, trust that. Now, we are in the book. Oh, by the way, thank you for being here. Like the video, share it with your friends, share it with at least 20 people, and then subscribe. We are on our way to 10,000 subscribers. We're ever so close. We're just shy of 500 subscribers away from having 10,000. And that will come soon. And so subscribe to this channel if you've not done so already, and that way you can keep up to date on everything. If you missed the Q&A we had with Zake and Yigal yesterday, the part 2 of the interview, check it out. We answered, I think, some questions that come up very often and hopefully are helpful to people to learn more about us as a movement, but also to help you in, your walk as a Lapid Jew. You're going to run into these very questions. And I want you to be educated. The thing about the Judaism that really sets us apart from a lot of other um, um, groups is that we educate people. We don't ask you to just rely or depend upon, my teaching or whatever, interpret. No, we encourage you to get the commentaries, to get the insights, to be self-educated. We are here to build people up, to build up leaders, to build up. I'm a firm believer in that. So yeah, so there we want you to be encouraged. So I want you to listen to these answers that we gave so that you can be educated and you can have intelligent, rational, logical conversations with people who object to who and what we are, because their objections are based on just ignorance, actually. And so this is opportunity to help them. All right, so we're in Shemot. The story begins with there's a new king in town, and he has forgotten about Joseph. A lot of time has gone past here, and we have become slaves in Egypt. Now, the thing I wanted to bring up, because there's so much, I was saying earlier, I was waxing eloquently just a minute ago and saying that all 5 books of the Torah are the Gospel of Moses. And I would like to say that the book of Shemot specifically is like the quintessential gospel. And I have said for years, if you do not understand the gospel of Shemot, if you don't understand the Exodus, and then you cannot understand the gospel of Messiah Yeshua. And the gospel of Messiah Yeshua, as it has been typically presented, is the exact and precise opposite of what the Bible teaches. The gospel that people have learned about, either by going to church or tuning in to television, Christian TV, they hear the alleged gospel. It is quite literally the exact opposite of what the Bible actually says, what actually Yeshua says, actually. So it's quite remarkable. We are here to fix that. We're not going to fix it by spouting a bunch of, this is my opinion. Here's some verses from the King James Version, whatever. We're going to actually fix it by looking at, facts and logic, and going to go about it that way. So anyway, welcome. Glad you're here. Listen, so we are in Egypt. The first thing I want to point out here, there's so many life lessons aside from the gospel thing I just mentioned, but there's also a bunch of life lessons here. The first and foremost is that contrary to popular belief, we were not minding our own business one day, just doing awesome, and then one day a bunch of Egyptian soldiers, not shoulders, but soldiers showed up and arrested us and made us slaves. That's not how it happened, okay? And this is a key point. After the death, so Jacob dies, and we take Jacob back to Canaan, back to the land of Israel, and we bury him. By that time, the famine was over. Now, we could have, probably should have, resettled in the land of Israel. I mean, Hashem had told Jacob that he'll live out his days in the land of Egypt. He'll retire there, and Hashem told Jacob, you'll die there. So it would make sense that we would remain in Egypt until our father Jacob died. Once he died, there's no reason for us to stay. Remember, the whole reason we're in Egypt to begin with is because there was a famine, and our bro, the one we said would never be the Messiah, actually turned out to be the Messiah, and that's a clue right there. And so we end up in the land of Goshen, which actually, remember, Goshen is the gematria of Goshen is Messiah. And so we're there in the land of Messiah, enjoying life, but we probably should have gone back to Israel because Hashem said, I give you this land, not that land. Okay. But we didn't. We went back to Egypt. Now, you could argue that it makes somewhat sense that we're going to go back to Egypt because, I mean, after all, our brother is the Mashiach. He is the, remember, Mashiach means anointed one. He's the Mashiach. He's the anointed one who is viceroy of Egypt. And basically, he's in control of the entire world. And so it kind of makes sense that we would go back and just kind of, chill in Egypt while our little brother is on the throne. Kind of makes sense, right? But then after he passes away, and the insights bring down that Joseph was the first to pass away. He did not live out. He died. He died at a younger age than anybody else. Okay. And there's some discussion about that, which is kind of interesting that, dominion shortens your years and things of that nature. But in any case, he died. Why didn't we go home then? There's nothing keeping us in Egypt is the point. Here's the point. The point is that we made a choice to stay in Egypt when we probably should not have. And the commentaries bring down that in actual fact, what happened to us in Egypt was we became slaves unto ourselves, meaning that we lost sight of our purpose and our mission, and we lost sight of the promise. Life was easy. We were drinking, mint juleps on the dock of the bay overlooking the Nile and watching the sunset, across the Nile Delta. And, it was a good life. We had, so it talks about the fact that we allowed the culture to embrace us. We allowed the culture to ensnare us. And in fact, that's right, Ahava, we were eating leeks, just having good leek soup. It was great. So and it talks about the fact that we actually began to embrace the idolatrous culture of Egypt. We began to assimilate. And ladies and gentlemen, that is what led to our enslavement. We began to develop a slave mind. And this is a very important point because the question is, how do we become slaves? And the answer is, it was our doing. And so on the one hand, it's our doing that we're slaves. And by the way, King Solomon referred to this entire episode, this exile in Egypt, as the iron furnace, hence the title of our class today. So I want you to understand something. This is a very crucial point for us all to understand. This slavery in Egypt is our fault. It's the Jewish fault. All the things that happen with respect to children being thrown into the Nile and babies being murdered by midwives and all the oppression, we have nobody to blame but ourselves. Okay? None of that would have happened if we would have left Egypt when we were supposed to. God did not say, remain in Egypt. He didn't tell us. There's no scripture verses that suggest that we were forbidden to leave Egypt. Not at all. God did not say, oh, by the way, I want you to start embracing idolatry and start living like Egyptians. No. Did Joseph do that? No. Why did we? So bringing this back to our own lives, I think you and I would agree that a lot of the oppression that we face in life, a lot of the exile type crucible that we walk through in our lives, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we would look in the mirror and say, this is your fault, right? We like to try to blame other people. We like to try to Gosh, don't we? We love to blame people. We love to say, well, if you hadn't, if I'd, you could have, we love that, right? But we don't really like to say, actually, this, this is all me. Turns out that a lot of what we go through in life is our own fault. Okay. And yes, there's circumstances and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it comes about because of choices that we made. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that very often, in a way in which only Hashem can work, he allows, orchestrates, permits, however you want to suggest it, that we go through these things, and even by our own failures, because it's those very things in life that make us the great people that we are today. And so this is a fact. It's one of those oxymorons. It's one of those kind of seemingly inexplicable issues. It seems counterintuitive, but this is the reality. So I just said all that I said about the fact that when we were in Egypt, we chose to stay in Egypt by our own failure. And therefore, we went through the exile, which King Solomon referred to as the iron furnace. And yet, it was very much necessary for us to go through that iron furnace in order to become the people that we are. I don't know a whole lot about forging iron in a blacksmith shop. My wife and I, she used to be a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. She used to be the 1860s docent of the 1860s farmstead at Old City Park, which I think is called something different now, Dallas Heritage Village, perhaps. But in any case, doesn't matter. She did that for like 5 years. And so she lived every day of her life. I say every day, but 5 days a week. She went to work, worked full time, and she lived in the 1860s. It was really kind of a cool job. At the time, I was working in the corporate world, and on the weekends, I used to go down there because she used to do special events and things like that for different things. And I would go down there, and we would live in the 1860s together in the farmstead. Well, the farmstead there, they had it was like a little ranch, small ranch, and they had a blacksmith, Kelly. His name was Kelly. Very nice guy. I actually officiated the wedding for Kelly and his wife, so that was fun. It was a long time ago, but anyway. He kind of told us a little bit. He was a professional blacksmith, and he did it the old-fashioned way. No, of course, 1860s. There's no modern equipment back there, So what he told me is that basically, the more time the iron goes in the fire, and the more time you hit the iron, and apply layers to it and put it in the fire and hit it, and put it in the fire and hit it, and put it in the fire and hit it. That's the way I understand it. If you're a blacksmith and I'm messing this up, please advise. But basically, as I understood it, the more times it goes into the fire, the hotter it is, and the more you hit it, the stronger it becomes. And that's how life is it not? The more you go into the fire, the more you get hit by the hammer. Who enjoys being first of all? Who enjoys going in the fire? Who enjoys getting hit by the hammer? And yet, it's that which makes us stronger. Listen to what the insights here. This is the introduction to the book of Shemot, or Parashah Shemot, from the Kehot Tumash. It says, in the book of Exodus, we see the seeds planted by the forefathers sprout. Okay. Their descendants are transformed into a nation. They receive their code of life. This is what the Torah is. The Torah is the code of life. How many of you, when you buy a new car, particularly a car you've never had before, a model that you've never had, how many of you take the manual of the car? This is the first things you would do. You'd buy the car, right? We all do this, right? You buy a car, brand new. You've never had this model. The first thing you do before you even drive it off the parking lot is you reach into the glove box. You take hold of the, what the excuse me, my reach here. You take hold of the the manual, the owner's manual, and you throw it in the garbage and you drive off. How many of you do that? We all do that, right? That's normal. You take the owner's manual out of the glove box and you trash it. Never to be seen again. Of course not. Of course not. I was being facetious. That's, of course, would be utterly idiotic. Okay. Because you don't want to take the creator's manual, the one who built the car. You need that manual because you need to know how the car functions. And if something, God forbid, goes wrong, you want to be able to refer to the manual to understand how the creator made the car so that you can properly take care of it. Right? Of course, right. Everybody knows that. So why would we want to get rid of the Torah again? I'm sorry. What was that reason exactly? We want to take the manual out of the glove box and throw it away. For what? Why would we do that? Oh, yeah. So it's the code of life. So it says the Torah and their mission, of course, was to prepare to fulfill their mission in life by building the tabernacle, which would become, of course, God's home on earth. And ultimately, we are the tabernacle. Therefore, we're supposed to be God's home on earth. Therefore, whatever was good for the tabernacle should be good for us. Therefore, you can ask your friends. I'm asking, a lot of times it's the Levitical choir that's watching these programs. But this is something you can ask people when they struggle with kosher laws. It's a very simple thing. You can just ask them, and their response is what they should do. And this is what you should tell them. Are you struggling with the idea that we shouldn't eat non-kosher food, like you think it doesn't matter? And they say to you, yeah, who cares? Whatever, we're under grace. You say, okay, 2 questions. Number 1, do you sincerely believe that you're the temple of God, like as a person? And of course, there's a 99% chance they're going to say yes. Okay. Second question, if the temple existed today, and you walked up to the temple and you were allowed to go inside, and you walked into the temple grounds, and there's the altar of the temple, and in the background is the edifice of the temple. And there is the Levitical choir, and there's all the priests and, the holiness of the temple. Would you feel comfortable sacrificing a pig on the altar? Now, there's a 99% chance, unless they're mentally unstable, that they're going to say, no. Then you can just say, okay, so you're the temple of God. So if you don't feel comfortable sacrificing a pig on the altar in God's temple, then why should you eat a pig? That's all you got to say. Pretty much that. What are they going to, you see the beauty of logic. This is why I love it. It's so simple. We don't have to do gymnastics. We don't have to, you remember the Twister game? Another nostalgia moment. Remember the Twister, the old Twister? Do they even have that anymore? It's probably outlawed because it's somehow offensive. But back then we used to play Twister. And so, this is really, a lot of people's theology is the game Twister. Thus, the Hebrew name of the book of Exodus is Shemot, meaning names, for through the events chronicled in this book, the Jewish nation and each individual Jew received their name. Now, in this case, it's not a literal name, but it's meaning their essential national and personal identification as Jews. Now, listen, I'm still reading here from the introduction to Shemot from the from the Kaled Humash. It says, so through this process, through this book, we received our name, meaning our essential nature. Now, listen to this. The key to this process, that is the process of receiving our essential nature, is exile. Now, exile here is the iron furnace. Exile is a word that's being used with the idea of going through trials and tribulations. Okay. So it says, exile calls forth the individual's hidden potential. His drive to survive despite the odds against him. Like it says in our parashah here in the Torah, it says, the more they oppressed them, the more they prospered. So it says that exile awakens this potential. It awakens the drive to survive despite the odds. In exile, a person cannot take life for granted. He must constantly decide whether to succumb or to overcome. The essential point of self-determination, which lies dormant during periods of prosperity and freedom. See, we all love prosperity and freedom, and I pray that we all enjoy prosperity and freedom. And yet, the unfortunate reality is that during periods of prosperity and freedom, we do not exhibit much growth. We do not gain much refinement of character. And that's unfortunate, but it's the reality. So it says, during the periods of prosperity and freedom, one is barred from being tested. This is why King Solomon calls the Egyptian exile the iron furnace. That's because it burned away the dross which was covering the innate Jewish soul. You know, it's about pressing on in the midst of adversity. If you listen to interviews of people who have been through intense special operations training, the group that's most popular, that's made it in the news most often, of course, is the Navy SEALs. Every branch has their special ops. Navy SEALs is just kind of more, commercially known, but the Marine Corps has the Marine Raiders, the Army has the Green Beret, and the Air Force has there's a paratroop special ops group. I forget what they're called, but they have their deal as well. But if you listen to interviews of people who've gone through any of that, what you find is it was not the most athletic person that makes it through necessarily. It wasn't the best swimmer, the best runner, the strongest, the greatest athlete. No. And a lot of times it's not uncommon to see those people fail rather quickly. Not always, but it's not uncommon. Okay. The person who survives and actually ends up becoming a Navy SEAL, a Green Beret, a Marine Raider, are the people who have the mental and emotional fortitude to press through, to not give up, to never quit. That's remarkable. That's remarkable. That's why when you see these guys that are in these special operations groups, they're not always necessarily, hulks or, giant, massive, guys. Not necessarily. Okay. You don't want to mess with them. But this is the very important thing, because we have this idea in our mind that the people who are successful in life, they have, all this extra stuff going for them. And the answer is no, we're not. It's all up in here. It's up in here. People get thrown off. Think about how many people who get thrown off of Torah, this life, Lapid Judaism, because of fear. How many people do you know that don't walk this walk because of peer pressure? Now think about that for a minute. This is truth. It's undeniable. I mean, you can't even get any more crystal clear than this. The message I taught on Shabbat about the bride of Messiah, it is ironclad what I was teaching. Not because I'm a genius, but just because we just go with the facts. In order to disbelieve it or not want to believe it, you have to psych yourself out and basically you have to embrace falsehood because of what? Because of fear, because of not wanting to change. because of peer pressure. How many people do you know succumb to that? Guys, that's all mental. It's all mental. How many people do you know that have denied Messiah or diminished him? He's just a human being. He's not divine, because they're trying to somehow fit in. They're trying to get people that they don't even know, that don't care 2 cents about them, to like them, because they have this social disorder of some kind in which they'd rather discard truth in order to be accepted or liked by people that don't even care about them. You see what I mean? This is why you and I have to understand that truth is truth. And this is why many are called but few are chosen. This is why there's a remnant. This is why there's not 10,000 Navy SEALs or 10,000 Marine Raiders that or Green Berets that graduate. It's usually, four, I don't know, a couple of hundred guys go in to try out, and like a dozen make it. That ought to tell us something. So it says the Egyptian exile was both physical and spiritual. The Jews' physical exile, of course, entailed breaking bondage and loss of autonomy, but their spiritual exile was their enslavement to the morals and values of the host culture, which led to the loss of divine consciousness and the loss of their awareness of God's involvement in life. Now, that is a very important statement, because this is a lot of times what exile did to the Jewish people, was to awaken them to divine consciousness, was to awaken them to their calling, their mission. And really, it wasn't, I say awaken, but it wasn't as if, oh, you know what? I just realized we have a mission. No, they already knew. Listen, Abraham knew, Isaac knew, Jacob knew, Joseph knew, the brothers knew. But through the cares of life, they had forgotten. See, the Torah is eternal, ladies and gentlemen. The Torah wasn't introduced at Mount Sinai as if it had never been heard of before. No, we learned that way before Abraham, we were keeping Torah. People were keeping Torah. Methuselah, Enoch. But what happens is the cares of life cause us to forget who we really are, and this is the value of the iron furnace. The value of the iron furnace is that we come to a consciousness. We come to a consciousness and we realize that, you know what? I'm called to something better than this. That's the value of the iron furnace. End of our Aliyah today. Listen, we're just getting started. Tomorrow, with God's help, we're going to introduce some interesting aspects and interesting correlations to the birth of Moses. It's very important because, again, everything about the gospel is found right here in the law of Moses, and specifically in the book of Exodus. So thank you for being here. Go out there and go through the crucible called life. Get your mind right. Get your emotions right. Have that Green Beret, Marine Raider, Navy SEAL attitude. The more that life oppresses you, just increase. God is going to see you through. It's all a test. So God bless all of you. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And until then, have a great and amazing day and be richly blessed.